Videos that will make you wealthy and debt-free.
After this, Chinkee Tan, also known as Mr. Chink Positive, thank you very much for joining. As I mentioned, every 11 o'clock in the morning, we will be broadcasting live. And today we have a special guest. He's a television host, at the same time a video blogger and a column writer for CNN Philippines, at the same time Philippine Star. Without further ado, let us welcome the good-looking guy. Siyempre naman, James Deakin. Yeah, James.
You gotta qualify, Chinkee. Good-looking under quarantine standards. You know, that's the new benchmark now. Look at this growth. Look.
Yeah. Well, it looks nice on you. It looks good on you. Well,
you know, it looks responsible. That's what this looks responsible, because it means like you're really just staying put and not going out, not caring about how you look outside, because you should be home. Anyway, go on.
Exactly. So my first question is this: how did this lockdown change your life?
Many levels to that, answering that question. Professionally, we'll start first, because I got hit very hard with the live events. I'm sure you did too. This is a big chunk of what I do in my income. So a lot of cancellations, obviously, for obvious reasons. Also, as far as CNN, that's been put on hold. I'm not there for now. So I have to take that loss. Then there's also, well, the social media side has, of course, stopped as well. But this is not because of, I guess, the health risks, etc. Obviously, we're on the internet. But there's, I think, a period of understanding what we're going through, the sensitivity of brands. Is it now the right time or the wrong time to advertise? So people are feeling their way around that space. So I've pretty much killed all my income for now. And but I'm not trying to put out a sob story, because everyone's got a story. Everyone's got a struggle. So this is just my own situation. I'm not trying to compare it to anyone who's going through a lot worse. But yeah, that's how it affected me professionally. The rest, I think, you know, my family, we understand what's going on. So it's a sacrifice. So we're just biting the bullet.
Your personal resources right now. How do you budget your resources right now?
Whew. I didn't even have time to be very honest. I didn't have time to plan and look at all of that, because we got hit so hard, so fast, and there was so much sort of trying to adjust to the new situation. There were so many things before that. I know that sounds crazy to somebody with your mind, but there was so much backlog in my other areas of life in terms of things that I just kept putting aside because I was too busy. So I caught up with that first before looking at, you know, the rest of how I'm going to budget, etc. Obviously, my staff, I still have to pay. And even if I didn't, even if it wasn't a dole, because a lot of them are not on the same dole. I do a lot of casual work with people and stuff like that. But, you know, everyone that's employed by the company is paid. We just got to run through that. And then we reinvent ourselves. I think this is a time in human history, Chinkee, where these things happen for a reason. Some look at it as nature's way of punishing us for things that we've done to her in the past. I like to look at it as preparing us for the next level of humanity. I think that the world, because as humans, we naturally evolve. This is what we're designed to do. So the only way to take us to the next level is to shock us out of our comfort zone. There's really no reason why we would invest all our time and energy and resources in developing things like this work from home programs and other things like that if it wasn't forced upon us by nature, in this case, the virus. So I like to look at it as that. I mean, call me a half full kind of guy, but that's my outlook on it. I look at it as like, listen, we've been through worse in different degrees, because you can say, no, this is worse than, let's say, I don't know, the Spanish flu. I'm not saying it is. I'm just using it as an example, right? But then you have to look at the time that they were living in at that time. They didn't have the resources we do. So maybe it was worse then. But what it does is it forces new behavior, and that new behavior will pay dividends later on, because we really do need to level up as humans. One area that I think is going to be dramatically hit in a very positive way is we will finally look at ways on how to spread people out, because we're spending so much money, especially if you look at, let's say, the transport, real estate sector, etc., to try to move people around the city. Why don't we now after this crisis, look at maybe spending the same kind of money or half of it into spreading people out, not moving them around, but forcing them to go out, saying, you know what, this has taught us who's essential and who's non-essential to physically be present in a workplace. We've seen that now. We've gone through an acid test of that. We go, wow, this is an awakening. If we don't learn from this, then we're really not going to evolve and we will die. But if we look at it like that and we say, okay, how do we stop that vulnerability? How do we not make ourselves susceptible to this kind of economic loss once again? We cannot go through this as a government. We cannot go through this as people. We cannot go through this as business. So it'll force people to think, how do we insulate ourselves from this vulnerability? People will start spreading out. BPOs will start either doing one of two things or a combination of both. They'll develop their AI and they're going to develop their work from home program. And that's going to solve that problem of if we ever get hit with another pandemic, which is inevitable. If you listen to Bill Gates, it was long overdue. Then we will know how to handle it. There's also the earthquake, Chinkee, the big one. You know, nobody's really talking about that. But that's also another thing that will paralyze a city if we're all sitting in one area, like Metro Manila, of almost 20 million people, daytime population. We are a disaster waiting to happen. Maybe we should be looking at this as a blessing and not anything else. Because otherwise, how else are we going to force almost, let's just go on the residential population of 12 million in Metro Manila. How else are we going to disperse that? Who wants to be first? If I tell you that we should disperse, you'll agree, but you'll say, well, ikaw muna, James, kasi I'm settled. I understand that. So something like this, as drastic as this, it shocks us into, okay, we gotta figure this out. Wow. So those are the positives I'm looking at. There's even small things like, well, not small, but if you solve the transport problem, also there's a humanity issue that I've been toying around with in my head, and I hope you can help me out with this theory. But I believe that perhaps a lot of the world's problems we have now in humanity is because we force ourselves to live in very high density situations. I don't think as humans we're designed for that. I think as humans we're designed to live in a community, a village, and then breed civilizations. But we don't work with great numbers, because once you exceed a certain number, I don't know what that number is, but once you exceed that, you develop conflict because there's power struggles. There's lack of tolerance and understanding because there's just too many people. So we've become less humane in big cities. We become less tolerant. We force people into adhering to one set of moral standards and legal standards because it has to be one rule for all. But we as human beings know if there's anything that's similar about us, is that we're all different. So when you try to force people into that square peg, round hole type of thing, and everyone's got to fit through that, you're going to create these problems. Maybe this virus is nature's way of showing us, you know what, get back out there in the communities, spread out physically, develop your smaller communities again, so that you can once again be more in touch with humanity. You can accept different cultures because you'll have different communities accepting different cultures, different religions, different ways of thinking. And you can understand you can all live apart. In fact, perhaps the only way we can get along is to live apart. Does any of this make sense, or am I been in isolation too long? Tell me, Chinkee, because I'm talking to walls already.
Actually, what you just mentioned is really well taken. At the same time, it's really well said. As a matter of fact, the president did promise, if you can still remember, James, that he will create a way for you to travel from Quezon City up to Makati in just 5 minutes. I think.
Yep, he's done that. Cubao to Makati in 5 minutes. We all said could never be done. Thank you, COVID.
Right now, it can be done. Traffic is gone, long queues are gone, gas is affordable. So you really hit the head on the nail when it comes to looking at the macro perspective, how it has impacted probably the workforce, the way we do business. Now, let me go on to the personal side. What's your personal realization in terms of what happened right now with this COVID, at the same time lockdown?
Bigat. It's given me a lot to think about. You start really seeing the value of things that you took for granted. One, just being able to go out and about. But then it also, once again, just like I said about humanity forcing us to perhaps spread out, it's forcing you to close in ranks as a family. You will go through periods, I'm sure, of wanting to eat your own young. That's normal. I'm sure even the DOJ might even grant temporary immunity for a certain period of quarantine. I'm joking, of course. But I think once you clear that hurdle, you'll be forced into a situation where you will need to close ranks to survive. So now we've learned. I had a really beautiful talk with my son the other day. Probably the most honest and, how do I call it? It was a very, I've never quite had that conversation with him before. I mean, and I always considered, and I always thought I was a very open person as a father, and I still do, even in hindsight, looking at. But I broke through some other barrier there, because somehow it puts things into perspective. You realize how vulnerable we really are. You realize who's really in control here.
Yeah.
If you're religious, then definitely it's God. If you are a scientist or just you believe in nature, you'll subscribe to the theory that it's the Earth that's in control. These are personal perspectives that you start to realize what matters and what doesn't.
Yes.
And that big thing about who's in control, because it reminds me of a quote I read in a book from Jonathan Haidt, who talks about the elephant and the rider, but he uses it as an analogy to describe the mind and your emotions, the way you think and the way you feel. And the way he puts that into perspective is, he says, you picture your emotions as the elephant and the rider as your mind. Now, who's in control? Almost everyone will tell you straight away, well, it's the rider, because the rider will tell the elephant where to go, right? It's the one sitting on top going, okay, let's take a left, let's take a right, let's take a left. And the elephant follows, right? But if the elephant decides to take a right when you tell it to take a left, who's really in control?
The elephant.
That's how I feel about the way that the Earth is. Maybe this is a new perspective that people need to realize, that this is a wake-up call, that we need to treat the Earth, put her first. She's like a mother, and we've been like going through the last 100 years of puberty as mankind. We still love her, but we're brats.
Yeah.
We've thought only of ourselves, and she, being a mother, has been almost perpetually kind to us, but even mothers have their limit, right?
Yeah.
So I'd look at it as that the Earth is now saying, you guys can continue what you want to do, and I probably even will love you like a mother will, but I can only take so much, and this will be the repercussions. And you'll realize then who's in control. Your money won't matter, your status won't matter, your power and your connections won't matter, because when I shut down, we're all equal. And guess who's boss? That's how I look at it. Those are some of the realizations I've had out of this.
Really great insight. Really great insight. Actually, this is probably my 6th interview already, and all of them really said what you just mentioned. That everything in life really, the things we thought that matters, like career, fame, power, success, it's not anymore essential. So right now, my question to you is this: 2 more questions. Is, what are the changes that you would like to do after this lockdown? What do you think are the changes that you will instill in yourself?
I will now try to put a bit more balance between work and family. I think I've got a clearer. We'll never really solve that problem. I think that's going to be the struggle of every working person out there, man or woman, who has a family, but I think I've got a clearer perspective of that. There's also the fact that on a macro level, not just personally, but I'm tagging along to the last thought about how we will also readjust a society in terms of how we educate our children. Because the educational system, these institutions have been under question for a long time, whether they're still relevant now in the modern world. And this kind of virus has actually put it out there once again, like social distancing. It's also put out this problem of, are we really preparing ourselves, our children, should I say, are we really preparing our children for real life? Because the old model of education works kind of like this. You spend the first half of your life, or a third of your life, learning. So you go to school and you study to become the person who you're going to be. So you define yourself professionally, personally, and with all your attainments. And then for the next third of your life, you will be trading off that first third. You will be making money off what you learned from the first third of your life. And then maybe if you're lucky, the last third, you'll be retired and enjoy life. Okay, that's an ideal situation, but it's a fair, I think, map of how we do things. Chinkee, I think that's completely outdated now, because I think that the modern world, people will have 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 careers in their life. And educational institutions need to teach us, focus less on teaching us how to do the job, but how to pivot and how to cope with the modern world. How to readjust, because we are, if there's anything humans have to do to survive, it's to evolve and adapt. We're not teaching our children that. We're teaching them, you learn this one profession and this will feed you for the rest of your life. That is not going to work in the modern world. The only people who probably will do that are brain surgeons and people who people like that, who really need to physically be there and can dedicate their life to their craft. But you could be an advertising executive, you could be a teacher, you could be a motivational speaker, you could be all these things, a radio announcer. In my life, that's all I've done. And I think in our last interview, I explained that, how I sold cars. I didn't have an education. I didn't have a clear, defined map of my life because I didn't finish high school. So I was naturally forced. That was my own personal disaster, should I say. My own personal disaster forced me to survive and adapt. And I was able to gain some success out of that because I was able to sniff out opportunity and shift. I was light on my feet. I wasn't committed to any particular type of profession, or nothing was holding me down. This is what it's going to do to a lot more people, is what I'm trying to say. The same vulnerability and thing that I felt was a tragedy that I didn't finish high school ended up being one of the best things that ever happened to me, because it forced me to learn how to survive, evolve, and smell out opportunity and make the best of it. This is what I think our educational institutions need to learn and start preparing our children for it. That's one of the other big things on a macro level. And on a personal level, I think also it's just, you need to just be respectful now of, it's teaching us something, it's telling us something. I'll go back again to the civilizations and stuff, because I think trying to force everybody into this old model of the reason that we all congregate in one city, and I'm not talking just Metro Manila, I'm talking worldwide, is it goes back to the model of what? Don't quote me on the year, but like the 1500s or something, when ships used to come in and dock. That was your port in either Manila or Vigan or all these areas, right? And then you build your cities around that. So the advantage was, the closer you are to the city center, the more advantageous, because you get closer access to goods, less expense. But with modern technology, that's redundant now. I mean, we can literally move parcels around. We don't need a port anymore. We've got so many different ways to get goods around. We've got e-commerce, but we're still working around that model of let's all go to the big city and make it happen. We will realize that we don't need to physically be present and all physically converge every single time. Of course, there will be still areas where we'll need to do that, and that's great, but we'll keep it into a more manageable number.
Wow, well said, really well said. I do perfectly.
See, this is what happens when you're alone in your head talking to walls.
Well, you know what? I do really agree with what you said about education. I've been spousing. Most of the time in educational system, they all force you to have high IQ. IQ is important, but more important nowadays is EQ, your emotional
Yes.
quotient. How do you cope when challenges hits, and how do you respond? And not only IQ and EQ, but AQ is more important, your adversity quotient. When crisis just like this comes, how do you adjust? How do you adapt? Because the only thing that is permanent in this world is change. So it's either you change or you become extinct, you innovate or you evaporate. Especially right now, I challenge the business people right now. If you do not change your entire business system to a work from home system, we don't even know how long will this last, right? So, and then one more Q that I also encourage in the part of the educational systems, not only IQ, EQ, AQ, but also FQ. We also must really empower and teach our kids about financial quotient, and not only how to make money, but handle, grow, manage, really to become entrepreneurs. And at the same time, one last thing you mentioned that you really, again, I really totally agree, is about remodeling. Remodeling the entire economy, remodeling the entire distribution system, remodeling the entire manufacturing system, or probably the way you communicate and distribute and the way you do your business. Yeah.
That's a nice thing to digest after this call, is to do that. Adversity quotient and financial.
Yes.
What do you call it? Quotient.
Financial quotient. Because you make money, but if you don't know how to manage your money, you lose everything. Even though you know how to manage your money, but if you do not know how to grow your money, you still need to grow your money, because one day you will stop working, and the moment you stop working, you stop earning, but you don't stop spending. You need to create a consistent source of passive income. And even though you're good with your creation, handling, growing, but if you are not good in terms of protecting your income, like for example, something happens to you physically, you got sick, or probably your business slows down. So what will happen? You need to also have what we call as you need to really learn how to protect also your money.
That's very good advice, and that I didn't touch on earlier. I should have added that into the thing. One of the things I learned personally was something also you mentioned to me before in our previous interview. I really need to diversify the sources of income, because I realized now, not through, I guess, I'm not trying to be hard on myself, but I realized now that, yes, I was vulnerable to this, because now almost all my income's dried up. If I didn't invest a little bit, and that was only very recently, that was just last year. My first investment I've ever made was last year in property, and if I didn't do that, I would probably be much more terrified than I am now. So you need to spread out the where your income's coming from. Don't put that all into one basket, because it could be a pandemic, it could be an earthquake, it could be a political situation. You don't know where it's going to hit, and if you only have one source and one source only, you leave yourself open. And this is why I go back to the educational system, preparing you to be able to pivot when you need to. I think we'll always need doctors and surgeons and stuff like that, but you can now, and nurses of course, but you can see how many other jobs will be taken over. Even to a certain degree, a lot of the doctors' roles will be taken over from work from home. It's only really the surgery and the actual, when they really need to perform. But other than that, diagnosing and all that, look, we've been on the cusp of that. In fact, we're doing that already. We just haven't made it mainstream. In fact, we're right there. It's sitting. The way I see it is, all the technology is there, but we haven't found a way how to completely make it mainstream. If you recall Facebook, when Facebook first started, do you remember that around 2004? Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with how that all, when that started, Facebook completely changed our lives, right? But there was social media around a lot, actually. There was Friendster, there was Multiply, there were all these different types of things, but nobody had quite found the magic formula to make it mainstream. That's exactly what I'm getting at. When Facebook made it mainstream, all of a sudden your tita started blogging. Your tita started having things to say. Your next door neighbors, whatever, everyone had a voice. Everyone had a platform, because they figured out how to just get everything that was already out there. They didn't reinvent the wheel. It was already there. They just found a way how to go, let's put this all together and make it mainstream, so it's like a plug-and-play system that even your tita can understand. And this is what I would like to see from the work from home program, is somebody to come up with all these little hurdles, because people are doing it independently here, there. Doctors are doing consultations, but our internet's weak, or this has a problem. Or now somebody's going to come up and solve all those problems for us, because there's money to be made from there, because there's demand. The demand will be high, and they'll say, okay, like these Zooms, I've only just started using Zoom, believe it or not. I know, I'm a real dinosaur, but I'm sure I'm not the only one out there that has not used, I've used Skype, of course, and Viber, but I'm using software to go live now. I've created my own little TV channel, so to speak. It's pretty messy. It's a work in progress. But the thing is, it forced me to get off my butt and do that, because now I have nothing else. And now I'm sitting here in my off time developing my own broadcast network, because that's I wouldn't have done that otherwise.
Yeah, actually, James, what you're saying is it forced us to reinvent. It forced us to redo things the way we used to do things. So right now, final word. I'm sure, James, as we are discussing these things, but there are a lot of people especially business people, professionals who are out there, people who lives by the day. They're still, they have fear. They have the fear of the unknown, fear of the future, fear what will happen to them, fear that they will lose everything already of what they've worked for. So what can you tell them right now?
This too shall pass. Okay? I guarantee you, this too shall pass. But let not the lessons be lost here. We have survived worse, and we'll probably go through worse later. But this is nature's way of forcing you to reinvent yourself. So find out, because there is always opportunity, sadly, at the cost of suffering. You know, it's just the way the world works. It's not my personal opinion on it. It's just the way the world works. When tragedy strikes, there's opportunity. So develop those survival skills, because that is the most human thing we have, is to survive. Do not rest on your laurels. Do not think that that government's going to take care of you. Your employer is going to take care of you. Yes, we've seen some shining examples of people doing that, but we've also seen some shocking examples of them just dropping you like that. So you realize now that you really are the one responsible for your own life. So when you look at it that way, and you start realizing that when the chips are down, you are the only going to be the one there for you and your family. And you will now learn how to sharpen up those survival instincts. Reinvent yourselves. We hate to repeat ourselves here in this thing, but it is just very true. When you reinvent yourself, it's giving you the opportunity to find out where the new needs are, what model doesn't work. There's so many legacy models now in businesses that will just have to be put to pasture. But we've been sustaining them and maintaining them for so long because we didn't really know what to do with them. But now it's like, okay, well, now we really have to move forward, trim the fat. I worry about how AI might come in. I'll be very honest with you. That's a concern of mine, because I think AI has always been sitting there waiting to take over certain jobs. But I think this will accelerate it at a pace that maybe there's going to be a sector of society that won't be able to cope with that new transition, because it'll happen really fast. Look at our BPO network. How many millions are employed there? If the AI comes in right now to solve the problem of that vulnerability in case of a pandemic or any other natural disaster, we can't work anymore from where we are, and they solve the problem by a lot more AI instead of work from home, then we're going to create this class of people that are they're talented, they're qualified, but they'll be displaced.
Yeah.
So there will be a transitional period, but look for the opportunity. It's
Great.
there.
Great. Okay, James, thank you very much. That's James Deakin for you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining in this short session. And I'm sure a lot of people are encouraged that they are not only experiencing this type of fears, but all of us, we're all in this together at the same time. We share the same sentiment. Again, this is Chinkee Tan saying, to every problem, there's always a solution. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Always. Chink positive.
Sa lahat ng subscriber ni Chinkee Tan, Chink Positive, please share it to your friends so that we'll hit the next 500,000, so to make it 1 million subscriber. Subscribe now here, and don't forget to click the bell. See you, Manila. God first.
Thank you for watching. If you want to keep on growing and to stay inspired, subscribe and hit the bell button to get notified. Always Chink Positive.